Another coup attempt, another failed plot. Burkina Faso's military government just announced it stopped a fresh move to overthrow the leadership, this time allegedly orchestrated by a former army officer. Security Minister Mahamadou Sana didn't mince words when he appeared on state TV. We were able to foil several attempts at destabilization. But for anyone paying attention, this isn't new. Traore has been a marked man from the start. Back in April 2025, something terrifying happened, right inside his inner circle. One of his own bodyguards was reportedly offered $5 million to pull the trigger. The man didn't take the deal. Instead, he exposed it. And from that moment on, nothing around Traore remained the same. He didn't panic. He didn't make a speech. He went quiet, and then he went to work. They say a wise leader doesn't just build walls. He makes sure every stone is watching, every window listens, and every door closes behind you. And that's what Traore did. Behind the scenes, he launched what some insiders now call the lockdown doctrine, a complete overhaul of the people, the protocols, and the power structure surrounding the presidency. Loyalty. It became more valuable than rank, intelligence, more important than tradition. The first major shift was in his own security. The presidential guard, once considered elite, was taken apart and rebuilt. Whole units were disbanded. New faces were brought in from lesser-known branches. Every single recruit passed through a level of background screening that went deep. We're talking school records, tribal ties, foreign contacts. Nothing was too small to track. But Traore knew this wasn't just about who held a gun. Revolutions don't die from bullets. They die from leaks, from whispers in the wrong ears, from trust placed in the wrong hands. So he tightened everything. Communications, encrypted, phones, banned in key zones, anyone connected to embassies, foreign NGOs, or outside governments. Quietly pushed out of sensitive spaces, he even brought back an old, mostly forgotten institution, the Office of Internal Counterintelligence. It used to be passive. Now, it's the nerve centre of national security. Its job, not just scanning for spies, but studying loyalties. Who's really with Traore, and who's just waiting to flip? From high-ranking officers to small-town police chiefs, every name is under the microscope. Traore isn't playing defence anymore. He's rewriting the rules. In Traore's new order, ideology became the gatekeeper. Anyone who didn't fit, politically, socially, or personally, was quietly removed from positions of influence. Some were sent to distant provinces, others shuffled into symbolic roles with no real power. But that was just the beginning. Beneath the surface, Traore wielded a far more unconventional weapon, the Volontaires pour la Défense de la Patrie, VDP. Officially, these were civilian volunteers, trained and armed to fight insurgents in the country's outermost regions. In reality, the VDP became Traore's most loyal inner circle, his second shield. Unlike the traditional military, where old loyalties and French influence still ran deep, the VDP were raw and eager. Young men from rural communities with little to lose, they saw Traore as a saviour. He gave them purpose, he gave them uniforms, he gave them salaries. And most of all, he gave them power. Power they never would have had otherwise. After the coup attempt, their role expanded dramatically. Instead of just guarding remote villages, VDP units were stationed closer to key administrative hubs. Some even moved into military bases, not as soldiers, but as shadow forces, eyes and ears embedded within the ranks. Traore wasn't just building a defensive force, he was creating something far more personal, a security immune system, a network of loyalists who could detect and deter threats from within before they could take root. And that wasn't all. The Ministry of the Interior began rolling out new biometric tracking systems under the guise of national registration efforts. But it quickly became clear these systems had another purpose, keeping tabs on flagged individuals. Every movement, every meeting, every transaction left a digital trace that could be monitored in real time. If all of this sounds like a leader tightening his grip, it's because he was. But consider the landscape. Burkina Faso is not a peaceful European democracy. It's a nation besieged on all sides. Armed groups burn villages, foreign NGOs carry hidden agendas, French influence lingers, and regional stability is unravelling. Traore wasn't responding to just one assassination attempt. He was declaring war on a system of invisible enemies, both foreign and domestic, that had kept his country vulnerable for decades. And he did it without spectacle. There were no parades of arrested conspirators, no grand speeches announcing his new plans. The overhaul was swift, quiet, and calculated. Information became a weapon. Those who had plotted against him were left in the dark. All they knew was that someone had flipped. The president was still alive, and the man they tried to kill was now more vigilant, more protected, and more prepared than ever. Suddenly, the rumours of secondary plots began to vanish. Ambitious officers sought reassignment to safer, less visible roles. Government ministries locked down their procedures. Even international critics had to admit, Traore's security shake-up was unprecedented. In a region where coups and conspiracies often drag on for years, his rapid consolidation of power sent a clear message. He wasn't going anywhere. Yet, no fortress is invulnerable. High walls can keep enemies out, but only if the gates stay closed. The question isn't just how Traore protected himself, it's why he had to. If you are still watching this video, it means you love it. Why not take out a second and hit that like button? Have you done that? Let us move on. Before anyone starts pointing fingers at Traore's tight grip on power, they need to understand the kind of mess he walked into. And we're not talking about political debates or international headlines. We're talking about the real messy kind of chaos, the kind where presidents don't just lose office, they vanish, where leaders don't retire, they get replaced overnight, sometimes by gunfire, sometimes by betrayal, always with danger lurking in the shadows. For the last several years, Burkina Faso hasn't been a country with leadership. It's been a country in survival mode. The seat of power didn't just change hands, it got fought over like a prize. So when Ibrahim Traoré took charge in September 2022, he wasn't walking into some presidential suite, he was stepping into a ticking time bomb. The man he replaced, Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, had promised to fix things after toppling former President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore. But instead of restoring peace, Damiba became everything people were tired of: indecisive, overly cosy with France, and slow to act. While he made speeches, villages burned. The army was breaking apart from the inside. People were losing hope. Again. That's when Traoré, just 34 years old, made his move. He launched a lightning-fast takeover, almost no bloodshed, and the country held its breath. For a moment, it felt like change had finally arrived. Some people even called him the next Sankara, a brave, bold voice for Africa's independence. But that honeymoon phase didn't last. The minute he took control, the threats began stacking up. Between 2023 and 2024, there weren't whispers or conspiracy theories. There were 4 actual coup attempts, each one more dangerous than the last. Real plots, real people, real intentions to bring him down. The first one came just months into his rule. A group of officers who had stayed loyal to Damiba tried to take him out. Some even had quiet backing from neighbouring powers who weren't fans of Traoré's anti-French tone. But they got it wrong. The plan leaked. Traoré moved fast. Arrests followed. And in a rare, sharp moment, he reminded the nation that enemies don't always hide in the forests or speak foreign tongues. Some wear shiny boots, polished medals, and speak the language of colonisers. But things didn't calm down. The second and third coup attempts weren't loud or violent. They were quiet enough to be scary. One came from a group of middle-ranking officers at a key military base outside the capital. They weren't waving flags or guns, they were quietly building alliances, using real frustration over delayed paychecks and sweeping reforms to stir unrest. The fourth attempt shook everyone. It came from inside the gendarmerie, the elite internal police meant to protect the state. If that's not a red flag, nothing is. It proved that cracks weren't just in the army. They were at the very heart of the institutions meant to guard the country. And every single time, Traoré had to adapt. These weren't all enemies with rifles and grenades. Some wore suits, some carried cameras, some fought not with bullets, but with influence. Things started getting weird in all the wrong places. Foreign diplomats began showing a little too much interest in what was going on. Aid workers were suddenly hanging around areas they never used to visit. And those old political families, the ones who had gone quiet when Traore rose to power, they started peeking their heads back up, like they were testing the weather. This wasn't some overreaction. Traore could feel it. Something real had shifted. Because the truth was, the fight wasn't just happening out in the desert or along dusty roads. It was right at his doorstep. He wasn't just dealing with gunmen hiding in the bushes. He was surrounded by shadows wearing suits and saluting with smiles. And then there's what's happening outside the capital. More than half of Burkina Faso is no longer truly under government control. In some towns, the national flag is gone, replaced by chaos. Militants and local warlords have stepped in where the state has disappeared. They've become the ones making laws, collecting money, and deciding who lives or dies. And here's the pattern nobody could ignore. Every time insurgents scored a big win, another coup plot seemed to follow. It wasn't a coincidence. Those battlefield losses didn't just fire up the rebels. They made people inside the government nervous. Soldiers started asking why supplies weren't showing up. Officers got tired of broken chains of command, and when leadership looks shaky, people go looking for someone else to follow. Meanwhile, outside players, those with their eyes on Burkina's gold, uranium, and strategic location, started circling. They weren't sending armies. They didn't need to. All it took was finding the right person with access and offering the right price. That's how it happened. A $5 million offer made its way to someone inches from Traore's side. Not some street-level fighter, not a fanatic, but someone trusted, someone close. And this wasn't random. This was someone placing a bet that pulling the trigger wouldn't just change one country, but shake the entire region. And why target Traore? Not because he held power, but because of how he used it. He didn't play nice. He didn't bow to foreign powers or recycle old leaders into new positions. He challenged everything that made Africa easy to exploit: division, dependency, and silence. That kind of leadership makes enemies. Fast. And Traore knew the $5 million bribe wasn't the first threat. It was just the first time someone put a price tag on it. By the time 4 separate coup attempts had surfaced, it became clear. This wasn't about one bad actor. The threat was everywhere. A general in uniform. A man who offers a toast. Someone who smiles just a little too wide at a security checkpoint. That's why Traore didn't just shuffle the furniture. He gutted the whole building. He rewired the intelligence network. He built a backup force from the ground up. Ordinary citizens turned into loyal defenders. Not because he wanted more soldiers, but because he couldn't risk relying on those trained under the old system. Because a coup doesn't start with gunfire. It starts with trust, broken from the inside. And now Traore's biggest question isn't whether someone will try again. It's who. Who had the confidence to try and buy off the man standing closest to the president? Who knew not just Traore's public image, but the quiet spaces where power breathes behind locked doors? Who decided that an assassination wouldn't just make noise, but change the game entirely? Whoever it was, they weren't guessing. They knew what they were doing. And if you want to figure it out, don't look at the rebels in the bush. Start with the polished boots, the tailored suits, the quiet rage of men who lost their thrones the day Traore stepped in. The former commanders, the career officers, the once untouchable names that no longer get invited to the war room. When Ibrahim Traoré took the reins, he didn't just shake the table, he flipped it over completely. Young, bold, and fiercely Pan-African, he didn't wait to play nice. He went straight for the power lines. Overnight, the old guard, generals groomed in French academies, officers fluent in NATO protocols, found themselves sidelined. No more trips to Paris for training. No more quiet deals for foreign weapons. That whole pipeline of influence from the West, cut. And then came the political elites. These weren't freedom fighters. They were brokers, middlemen between Burkina Faso and the foreign companies that mined its gold built its roads, and ran its banks. For years, they thrived in the shadows of NGOs and aid packages, packaging development while pocketing the profits. Traore cut them off. He tore up sweetheart mining contracts. He nationalised infrastructure. He booted out foreign aid groups that were tangled up in elite networks. He wasn't just fighting for sovereignty. He was unplugging the entire system that made exploitation so easy. To the elites, he wasn't just dangerous, he was a walking financial apocalypse. But this isn't just about angry businessmen or retired generals nursing wounded pride. This is bigger. Since that $5 million plot to take Traore out came to light, a chilling suspicion has been echoing through the streets of Ouagadougou. La France est derrière ça. France is behind this. No official evidence, no confirmed claims. But the pattern is hard to ignore. Look at what's happened since Traore took power. France's grip on West Africa has unravelled like old rope. Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger. One by one, French troops were shown the door. Military pacts shredded. Embassies gutted. French media kicked out. What was once proudly called France-Afrique now looks like a hollowed-out map. And who's at the centre of that collapse? Ibrahim Traoré. He didn't just talk about independence, he made it policy. He didn't just invoke Sankara, he updated him. When he stood before crowds and shouted, "The land belongs to the people, not to the empire," it wasn't just political theatre, it was a direct shot at everything colonialism left behind. Now imagine you're the former empire. You're watching your decades-long strategy disintegrate. Russia is moving in. Local support is growing. Leaders across the continent are taking notes. At what point do you stop being a spectator? That's why so many believe this assassination attempt didn't start in a village or a barracks. It started with someone who had the motive, the means, and the nerve to trigger chaos. Quietly. Not with soldiers, but with the old playbook. Untraceable mercenaries, disinformation campaigns, whispered promises, and dirty money. The kind of tools that never show up in official reports, but always show up in conflict zones. And France may not be the only suspect. The United States, while more careful in its diplomacy, has plenty to lose in this region too. Its military operations, drone bases, intelligence networks, all depend on predictable allies. When Traore expelled Western troops and started tilting toward Moscow, he wasn't just breaking ranks, he was breaking the model the West had spent years building. The United States might not send hit squads, but let's not pretend it's all handshakes and press statements either. Washington has other ways to tighten the screws: economic levers, diplomatic freezes, slow suffocation by sanctions. But history shows that even the boldest leaders have disappeared under the cover of internal unrest, and that pattern didn't start in Burkina Faso. And then there's Russia, the wild card that doesn't even need to play. Because in this story, every time Traore survives, Russia wins. As Western influence fades, Moscow's presence deepens. No boots on the ground, no loud declarations. Just quiet nods, silent deals, and strategic patience. They may not be pulling strings, but they're certainly holding a seat at the table, watching the drama unfold while offering just enough support to keep Traore standing and leaning east. But perhaps the most dangerous threat doesn't wear a flag at all. It's not a government, it's a network, a twisted alliance of former power brokers, ousted military commanders, corporate fixers, and financial giants with interests buried deep beneath the Sahel soil. They don't care about speeches, they care about gold, lithium, access. They care about contracts, not constitutions. And for them, Traore is a problem. Not because he's unpredictable, because he's loud. Loud enough to echo through the region. Loud enough to revive the spirit of Sankara. Loud enough to inspire leaders and movements far beyond Burkina's borders. That's why someone was willing to pay $5 million. Not just to silence a man, but to stop a wave. To kill the signal before it becomes contagious. They failed, for now. But the attempt sent a message. Traore is being hunted, not by a single hand, but by an invisible web of actors who see his leadership as a threat to everything they have built. So now what? Traore has doubled down, rebuilding his security like a fortress. More guards, more tech, more layers of loyalty checks. He's created a new ecosystem of protection, more digital, more human, more paranoid. And yet the danger hasn't shrunk, it's expanded, because in Burkina Faso, threats don't march in formation. They slither. Some wear medals, some wear three-piece suits, some don't even exist yet, at least not until a phone rings with an offer they can't refuse. That's the reality Traore now lives in. He's not just fighting for survival, he's fighting against time. The longer he stays in power, the more enemies he makes. Every new reform takes something from someone. Every crackdown closes a door someone used to walk through. Every contract denied is another grudge born in silence. And the most fragile part of this defence? Loyalty. Traore has poured resources into vetting the people closest to him. He set up reward systems, surveillance layers, counterintelligence webs. But people are unpredictable. Today's trusted aide can be tomorrow's ghost. Loyalty can spoil in quiet moments, when someone feels overlooked, outmaneuvered, or simply afraid. Jealousy doesn't send a memo. Bitterness doesn't get caught on tape. Traore's intelligence network might track emails, calls, even quiet transactions between officers and shadow donors. But you can't monitor a sideways glance. You can't scan for the moment someone decides it's not loyalty they feel anymore. It's resentment. Sometimes the harder you squeeze, the more things slip through your fingers. That's the danger Traore faces now. Every move to tighten control, reshuffling ranks, cutting ties, locking down loyalty, creates new pressure. And pressure builds cracks. Imagine being a young officer, promised a future but passed over again and again. Or a village volunteer who once believed he was fighting for a cause, only to return home and find his community forgotten. That's when the loyalty starts to shift, not in speeches, but in silence. Burkina Faso's a place where coups don't announce themselves. They simmer. You feel them in the air before you see them in action. And even Traore's most trusted force, the VDP, isn't immune. They fought with grit. They've bled for their country. But many are unpaid, under-equipped and facing danger every day with little backup. Their devotion can't survive on slogans alone. In war, hope has a shelf life. And once it expires, so can allegiance. Then there's the danger outside the borders, the kind of threat you can't arrest or shoot at. Traore's pivot toward Russia and the Sahel bloc has earned him praise in some corners. But it's also painted a target on his back. The West is watching, and they've mastered the art of waiting. Because in global politics, patience can be a weapon. It gives time for doubts to grow, allies to wander, and enemies to sharpen their knives without making a sound. You don't need an assassin when you have banks that freeze assets, companies that pull the plug, platforms that quietly redirect the narrative. And what about the battlefield that never makes the news? The algorithm, the whisper networks, the ghost wars fought with tweets and signal groups and encrypted bribes. Burkina Faso is already fighting them, and Traore knows it. Still, for now, he has the people. He's seen as the voice of resistance, a symbol, a throwback to Sankara, a fresh break from the politics of compromise. He's inspired the youth, shaken the old alliances, and reignited a pan-African flame that had almost gone out. But support doesn't stay loyal by default. It needs progress. And here's the hard truth. The insurgents still hold ground. The economy is still struggling. Many regions remain lawless. If those realities don't change, the applause will fade. Slowly, quietly. Until one day the people stop cheering. And that silence, that's the sound that takes down leaders. Not a gunshot. Not a coup. Just absence. So is Traore safe? Safer than before? Yes, safe. Number. He's bought time, but time doesn't come with guarantees. It listens to momentum, and momentum listens to whoever's making real change. The palace may be surrounded by guards, but what about the economy? The morale, the shifting alliances and whispered frustrations in army tents and marketplaces? Those aren't as easy to protect. Burkina Faso has seen this before, again and again, And history here doesn't ask for permission to repeat itself. Because in the end, it might not take another $5 million. It might only take a moment of hesitation, a single window of weakness. So what do you think? Is Traore really in control? Could his enemies take him down? And if so, how? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it.